Chapter 3 Ruling the Countryside. On 12th August 1765, the Mughal Emperor appointed the East India Company as the Diwan of Bengal. As the Diwan, the company became the chief financial administrator of the territory under its control. The company had become the Diwan, but it still saw itself primarily as a trader. It wanted a large revenue income but was unwilling to set up any regular system of assessment and collection. The only effort was to increase the revenue as much as it could and to buy fine cotton and silk cloth as cheaply as possible. Within 5 years, the value of goods bought by the company in Bengal doubled. Before 1865, the company had purchased goods in India by importing gold and silver from Britain. Now, the revenue collected in Bengal could finance the purchase of goods for export. But it was clear that the Bengal economy was facing a deep crisis. Artisans were deserting villages since they were being forced to sell their goods to the company at low prices. Peasants were unable to pay the dues that were being demanded from them. Artisanal production was in decline and agricultural cultivation showed signs of collapse. Then, in 1770, a terrible famine killed 10 million people in Bengal. About 1/3 of the population was wiped out. Most company officials began to feel that investment in land had to be encouraged and agriculture had to be improved. After 2 decades of debate, the company finally introduced the permanent settlement in 1793. By the terms of the settlement, the Rajas and Talukdars were recognized as zamindars, who were asked to collect rent from the peasants and pay a fixed amount of revenue to the company. It was felt that this would ensure a regular flow of revenue to the company and, at the same time, encourage the zamindars to invest in improving the land. Since the revenue demand of the state would not be increased, the zamindar would benefit from the increased production of the land. The problem with this settlement was that the company officials soon discovered that the zamindars were in fact not investing in the improvement of land. The revenue had been fixed so high that the zamindars found it difficult to pay, and anyone who failed to pay the revenue lost his zamindari. By the early 19th century, many of the company officials were convinced that the system of revenue had to be changed again. Holt Mackenzie, an Englishman from the northwestern provinces of the Bengal Presidency, devised a new system which came into effect in 1822. He felt that the village was an important social institution in the northern Indian society and needed to be preserved. Under his directions, collectors went from village to village inspecting the land, measuring the fields, and recording the customs and rights of different groups. The estimated revenue of each plot within a village was added up to calculate the revenue that each village had to pay. This demand was to be revised periodically and was not permanently fixed. The charge of collecting the revenue and paying it to the company was given to the village headman rather than the zamindar. This system came to be known as the Mahalwari Settlement. At the time, Thomas Munro devised a new system known as the Ryoti System. This system of land revenue was introduced by the British in the Madras and Bombay presidencies. The government made settlements with farms for a specific period for 30 years. The farmer had to pay 50% of their production to the government every year. The settlement could be soon revised after a stipulated period. Within a few years, the new systems were imposed, and it was clear that all was not well with them. Driven by the desire to increase the income from land, revenue officials fixed a too high revenue demand. The peasants were unable to pay. Riots fled the countryside and villages became deserted in many regions. The British realized that the countryside could not only yield revenue, but it could also grow the crops that Europe required. By the late 18th century, the company was trying its best to expand the cultivation on certain crops such as the indigo plant that grows primarily in the tropics. In the 13th century, Indian indigo was being used by the cloth manufacturers in Italy, France, and Britain to dye clothes. However, only small amounts of Indian indigo reached the European market, and its price was very high. European cloth manufacturers therefore had to depend on another plant called woad to make violet and blue dyes. Being a plant of the temperate zone, woad was more easily available in Europe. Cloth dyers, however, preferred indigo as a dye, as indigo produced a rich blue color, whereas dye from woad was pale and dull. By the end of the 18th century, the demand for Indian indigo grew further. Britain began to industrialize and its cotton production expanded dramatically, creating an enormous new demand for cloth dyes. While the demand for indigo increased, its existing supplies from the West Indies and America collapsed for a variety of reasons. Between 1783 and 1789, the production of indigo in the world fell by half. Cloth dyers in Britain now desperately looked for new sources of indigo supply. Faced with the rising demand for indigo in Europe, the company in India looked for ways to expand the area under indigo cultivation. From the last decades of the 18th century, indigo cultivation in Bengal expanded rapidly, and Bengal indigo came to dominate the world market. In 1788, only about 30% of the indigo imported into Britain was from India. By 1810, the proportion had gone up to 95%. As the indigo trade grew, commercial agents and officials of the company began investing in indigo production. Many company officials left their jobs to look after their indigo business. Attracted by the prospects of high profits, numerous Scotsmen and Englishmen came to India and became planters. Those who had no money to produce indigo could get loans from the company and the banks that were coming up at that time. There were two main systems of indigo cultivation, niche and Ryoti. Within the system of niche cultivation, the planter produced indigo in lands that he directly controlled. He either bought the land or rented it from other zamindars and produced indigo by directly employing hired laborers. The problem with the niche cultivation was that the planters found it difficult to expand the area of cultivation, as indigo could be cultivated only on fertile lands. The planters needed larger areas to cultivate indigo, and only scattered lands were fertile. The planters even attempted to get lease in the land around the indigo factory and evict the peasants from the area. But this always led to conflicts. Nor was the labor easy to mobilize, as it was needed precisely at the time when peasants were usually busy with their rice cultivation. Niche cultivation on a large scale also required many plows and bullocks. Investing on purchase and maintenance of plows was a big problem. Nor could supplies be easily got from the peasants, since their plows and bullocks were busy on their rice fields, again, exactly at the time that the indigo planters needed them. Till the late 19th century, planters were therefore reluctant to expand the area under niche cultivation. Less than 25% of the land producing indigo was under this system. The rest was under an alternative mode of cultivation, the Ryoti system. Under the Ryoti system, the planters forced the ryots to sign an agreement. At times, they pressurized the village headmen to sign the agreement on behalf of the ryots. Those who signed the contract got cash advances from the planters at low rates of interest to produce indigo. But the loan committed the Ryot to be cultivating indigo on at least 25% of the area under his holding. The planter provided the seed and the drill, while the cultivators prepared the soil, sowed the seeds, and looked after the crops. When the crop was delivered to the planter after the harvest, a new loan was given to the Ryot, and the cycle started all over again. Peasants who were initially tempted by the loans soon realized how harsh the system was. The price they got for the indigo produced was very low, and the cycle of loans never ended. There were other problems too. The planters usually insisted that indigo be cultivated on the best soils, in which peasants preferred to cultivate rice. Indigo, moreover, had deep roots and it exhausted the soil rapidly. After an indigo harvest, the land could not be sown with rice. In March 1859, thousands of ryots in Bengal refused to grow indigo. As the rebellion spread, ryots refused to pay rents to the planters and attacked indigo factories armed with swords, spears, bows, and arrows. Women turned up to fight with pots, pans, and kitchen implements. The agents of the planters who came to collect rent were beaten up. The ryots swore that they would no longer take advances to sow indigo nor be bullied by the planters. After the revolt of 1857, the British government was particularly worried about the possibility of another popular rebellion. News spread of a simmering revolt in the indigo districts. The lieutenant governor toured in the region in the winter of 1859. The ryots saw the tour as a sign of government sympathy for their plight. When in Barsat, the magistrate Ashley Eden issued a notice stating that ryots would no longer be compelled to accept indigo contracts, word went around that Queen Victoria had declared that indigo need not be sown. Eden was trying to placate the peasants and control an explosive situation, but his actions were read as support for the rebellion. As the rebellion spread, intellectuals from Calcutta rushed to the indigo districts. The tyranny of the planters and the horrors of the indigo system. Worried by the rebellion, the government brought in the military to protect the planters from assault and set up the Indigo Commission to inquire into the system of indigo production. The commission held the planters guilty and criticized them for the coercive methods they used with indigo cultivators. It declared that indigo production was not profitable for ryots. The commission asked the ryots to fulfill their existing contracts, but also told them that they could refuse to produce indigo in the future. Thank you.